It is a peculiar quirk of the English countryside that tragedy so often announces itself not with a scream, but with the polite clink of Wedgwood china. Thus it was on the third Sunday of Lent, at precisely 3:04, that Lady Astwith's afternoon tea was interrupted not by the local constable, as might be expected in less well-bred dramas, but by the Reverend Simon Thistlethwaite, who arrived in damp gaiters and moral agitation, cradling what appeared to be a rather elderly pocket Bible and smelling faintly of beeswax and ecclesiastical mildew. "I do beg your pardon, ma'am," he intoned, bowing over the tray with the air of one genuflecting to a higher authority. "But it appears there's been, well, not exactly a death, I mean not officially, but a rather worrying discovery under the north staircase." "Yes, quite." This vague but disquieting statement might have gone unheeded had not Lady Astwith's companion, a Miss Clara Liddell, recently of St. Hilda's, Oxford, and a sworn enemy to euphemism, dropped her teacup into her lap and demanded, with admirable directness, "Is it a body, then?" Whereupon Lady Astwith rang the bell not for more tea but for Baines, her somnolent butler, and inquired whether her nephew, Lord Peter Wimsey, had returned from his walk. It was the sort of question one asked of Wimsey, not because one expected him to be useful, but because he had an alarming tendency to make himself so, particularly where there was a sniff of scandal beneath the fusty upholstery of an ancestral home. As it happened, Lord Peter was found in the library, seated cross-legged on a chaise longue beneath the imposing oil portrait of Sir Cedric Astwith, 3rd Baronet, and wholly absorbed in a copy of the Book of Common Prayer, which he was reading backwards for amusement. Upon being informed that a body might have been found, he raised a finger, turned a final page, and said, "Oh, good! I was beginning to worry this house was terminally dull. Laid on, Macduff, or is it Macbeth? I never can remember who does the leading." The scene of the alleged discovery was not nearly so ghastly as the vicar's strained expression suggested. It was an alcove beneath the broad northern staircase of Astwith Hall, a draughty and rather uncharismatic bit of Victorian addition grafted inelegantly onto the Georgian bones of the place. The alcove, usually concealed behind a hinged panel of scuffed oak, had long served as an overflow cupboard for mops, feather dusters, and at one point a deceased parrot in camphor. I came in search of a broken kneeler. Actually, Reverend Thistlethwaite explained, nervously tugging his cassock, Mrs. Plumridge said she saw one shoved in here after Christmas. And instead, well. Wimsey crouched, his long frame folding like a concertina, and peered into the gloom. A thin stream of late March sunlight filtered through a narrow stained-glass window above the landing, cast shifting reds and greens across the floor, where a scatter of dislodged objects, half a broom, a dog-eared hymnal, a pair of spectacles, with one arm missing, surrounded what appeared to be a cracked stone slab, lifted at the corner as though by some subterranean disquiet. The faint odour of damp and iron hung in the air, and beneath it, perhaps, a darker trace. Something earthy, and unclean like turned soil too long left untouched. Said Wimsey, removing a pair of kid gloves and sniffing delicately. "That, if I'm not mistaken, is a remnant of old blood. Not new enough to be thrilling, but not so ancient as to qualify as archaeological. Shall we?" He eased the slab higher with one hand and whistled low. The others leaned in cautiously. Beneath the stair, buried shallowly in compacted dirt, lay what could not quite be called a body, but had every right to claim a grim sort of adjacency. The remains were partial, a ribcage, a tangle of fabric, something grey that might once have been hair, and nestled between the remnants, a child's ivory rattle, cracked but strangely intact. There was a long silence. Lady Astwith dabbed her nose with a handkerchief, murmured something about having always hated that staircase, and left in a rustle of silk and discomfort. The vicar muttered a psalm. Miss Liddell made a scribbled note in her journal, and seemed faintly annoyed that the corpse had come too late for tea. Lord Peter, meanwhile, had reached into the alcove with surprising delicacy, extracted the rattle, and turned it over in his fingers. His expression, always a shade too cheerful for such moments, darkened just slightly at the edges. "No head," he murmured. "How frightfully inconvenient. Still, very good of them to include a toy. One so hates a mystery that lacks symbolism. Then, to no one in particular, he added, "Now why should someone bury a child beneath a staircase, and what possible use would a baronet's household have for an ivory rattle in 1898? Unless, of course, the child was not supposed to be here at all. The library at Asquith Hall, though tastefully grim in its panelled solemnity, offered no particular consolation when one had just uncovered a partial skeleton beneath the north staircase. Nevertheless, it was here that Lord Peter Wimsey had chosen to reconvene, sprawled upon the window seat, with the ivory rattle held aloft against the weak sun, squinting through its hollowed loops with the air of a man inspecting a monocle rather, badly designed. The housekeeper, Mrs. Vickery, was summoned, her starch-creased apron trembling only slightly with indignation. "Madam Vickery," Wimsey said, drawing out her title as though it were a comic aria, "have we, in this fine and respectable establishment, ever misplaced a child?" The woman's lips compressed into something between disapproval and terror. "Misplaced, my lord. This is not a grocer's nor a foundling hospital. Were a good Christian household. Sir Cedric would never—" She paused, the name sticking slightly in her throat. "Never have permitted anything improper under his roof." "Yes," Wimsey said with a cheerful sigh, "but you see, someone evidently did. And unless the good vicar is developing a taste for grave robbing, and poor taste at that, this unfortunate waif did not tunnel beneath the stair on its own initiative. And a rattle, of all things. Why not a silver spoon, or a book of poetry? At least we'd know the child had ambitions." Miss Liddell, seated nearby and scribbling in her infernal green notebook, cleared her throat. "If I may, Sir Cedric died in 1901, did he not?" Mrs. Vickery nodded reluctantly. "And the extension, this northern wing, it was added just after the Jubilee, 1897. The old master always said Her Majesty's 50 years on the throne deserved something in brick and mortar. Then the body," Miss Liddell said crisply, "was likely buried before the staircase. It was constructed." "An excellent deduction," Wimsey said approvingly, "though it does make the act even more deliberate, doesn't it? One does not typically lay a corpse on the soil and then build a staircase over it unless one is planning something. Do you recall, Vickery, any child, perhaps a visiting infant, an accident, a stillbirth, anything that would account for this?" The woman hesitated. Her mouth opened, shut, and opened again with the cautious rhythm of a safecracker listening for tumblers. "There was a girl," she said finally, almost inaudibly. "Years ago. One of the maids, Edith Cramwell. A pretty thing, silly, as a feather, but always smiling. She worked here in 97, not long after the wing was built, and then one day she was gone. No warning, no suitcase packed. Lady Asquith, the old lady, not the present one, said she'd run off with a tradesman, but we all knew she hadn't taken her shoes." "I don't follow," said Miss Liddell, blinking. "She kept her shoes beneath her cot," Vickery said, grimly. 3 pairs. She polished them every Sunday. Wouldn't leave them behind, not if the devil himself were at her heels." "Indeed," Wimsey murmured, lifting the rattle once more. "Was she in the family way by any chance?" "I wouldn't know, my lord, but she was always a little pale, and always singing lullabies now that I think on it." "Ah." He stood, stretching his long limbs and depositing the rattle delicately atop a side table as though afraid it might begin to cry. "Let's have a look at the servant registers, if you please, and see whether Edie truly disappeared, or was merely erased." The registers, retrieved from an armoire so ancient it groaned with every hinge, were neatly inscribed in spidery ink by the successive hands of footmen, stewards, and Mrs. Vickery herself. Edith Cramwell's name appeared precisely once, entered in August of 1897, marked undermaid, laundry, and then 6 months later struck through with a flourish that could have been enthusiasm or fury. "No reason given," Wimsey noted. "Just a dash, how tidy. Did anyone else leave about the same time?" Mrs. Vickery flipped back and forth, lips pursed in calculation. "Only the gardener's boy," she said, "and cook, but that was for her niece's wedding." Wimsey tapped a finger against the rattle. "What about birth records? There's a parish office, I assume? Banns, christenings, that sort of thing?" The vicar, summoned again like a reluctant spirit, arrived with a sheaf of yellowed certificates, most of which were written in such resolutely ecclesiastical handwriting that even Whimsy blinked. "Can't promise anything," the Reverend said. "We kept spotty records in those years. Sir Cedric was never fond of paperwork." "You surprise me," Whimsy murmured, running a finger down one column. "Here we are. December 1897. Infant unnamed female, stillborn. Mother unknown. Entry made by household physician, Dr. Reginald S. Carruthers." Miss Liddell leaned over. "Do you suppose that was Edith's?" "Likely," Whimsy said. "Or, at the very least, someone wanted it to seem so." He looked up suddenly. "Tell me, Vickery, did the good Dr. Carruthers have a particularly active imagination?" "I beg your pardon, my lord." "Well, it's just that this entry is rather suspiciously vague for a man of medicine. Unnamed. Mother unknown. Rather economical, isn't it? Most doctors are thorough to a fault, except when told not to be." She coloured slightly. "Dr. Carruthers left the village not long after. Went abroad, I believe. India or Egypt, one of those dry places." Yes, dry enough for secrets, certainly." He tapped the birth record once more, then returned to the window, staring again at the garden path, where an early mist had begun to settle. He watched the fog curling at the edges of the hedges, the way it licked at the gravel like an animal, sniffing its way home. "Do you smell something odd?" he asked suddenly. "Musty," said Miss Liddell. "Like mould." "Like camphor," corrected Whimsy. "And the ghost of camphor specifically, which is rather more telling. There was something else in that alcove. Not just the bones. There was a preservative smell. Not formaldehyde, not liniment, but something medicinal. Could it be the parrot?" Miss Liddell suggested wryly. He turned, eyes glinting. "Oh yes, the parrot. That damned parrot that Lady Asquith insisted was taxidermied in camphor and kept in the cupboard for sentimental reasons. You don't suppose—" But the thought, whatever it was, trailed off. Instead, he leaned forward and plucked the spectacles from the tray of recovered items. "These," he said softly, "are not a child's, and not a woman's. Large bridge. Quite square. Prescription strong, not the sort one loses easily. And yet they were there, mixed in with the bones." So, Whimsy said, "if we believe the remains are Edith's poor infant, then we must ask ourselves, what the devil was a man doing down there with her?" There was a long pause, and then, somewhere in the distance, a bell tolled the hour, though no one quite remembered it being wound. Lord Peter Whimsy replaced the spectacles gently on the tray, as though they might shatter under the weight of his thoughts. The clatter of the church bell, sounding the hour with a sluggishness entirely inappropriate to its design, seemed to echo the slow unfolding of the mystery itself, deliberate, ominous, and curiously out of joint with the ordinary progression of time. "Tell me, Reverend," Whimsy began, addressing Thistlethwaite, "is it not peculiar that the church clock strikes at odd intervals these days? It appears to have fallen out of synchronization with the rest of the world." The vicar cleared his throat, clearly unsettled by the question. "It's been troubling the sexton, my lord. The mechanism is old and needs repair, but funds are scarce. We've put off the work until the harvest is better." "Ah, the harvest," Whimsy mused. "A season of much waiting and little certainty. It seems the same applies here. The clock, the bones and the spirits of Asquith Hall are all awaiting their reckoning." Lady Asquith's drawing-room was now the setting for a small assembly. Herself, the vicar, Miss Liddell, Mrs. Vickery, and Whimsy. Each face bore the strain. Of the day's revelations, though none showed outright fear, English reserve is a formidable dam against panic. Whimsy took the opportunity to direct his attention toward the servants' quarters, and particularly toward the kitchen, where the bustle of domesticity attempted to mask the undercurrent of anxiety. It was there he found Baines, the butler, polishing a silver salver with such intensity that one suspected it was less about cleanliness and more about distraction. "Baines," Whimsy said, adopting an affable tone, "might I trouble you for a few moments? It concerns the salver itself." Baines looked up, startled, then composed himself with a slight bow. "At your service, my lord. The salver is a family heirloom, much polished and much polished upon. Forgive my bluntness, but I fail to see how it relates to—" "Merely indulge me. Has anything unusual been noted about the salver of late? Missing, misplaced perhaps? Baines rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Now you mention it, my lord, Lady Astwyth did express a certain displeasure last week when she could not find it on the sideboard. It turned up eventually beneath a cushion in the drawing-room. No explanation, just a misplaced salver. Indeed, Wimsey said, nodding. And who might have last handled it? Your lordship must forgive me, but the household is large and busy. The cook handles it during teas, the maids during cleaning, and the lordship's nephew enjoys carrying it about to annoy his cousins. Ah, the cousins, an excellent source of potential disorder. Speaking of which, has any of the family been notably vexed of late? An argument? A slight? A whisper of discontent? Baines hesitated. There has been tension. The late Sir Cedric's will was, shall we say, less generous than expected to certain nephews and nieces. One, Lord Quentin, has been seen skulking about with a rather sour expression. Also, Lady Astwyth's new husband, Sir Reginald, seems more interested in the estate's coffers than in conviviality. Wimsey gave a slow smile, amused by the familiar cast of characters. The disgruntled heir, the mercenary spouse, the resentful cousins, all ingredients for a domestic stew far more potent than the Earl Grey. Leaving Baines to his polishing, Wimsey proceeded to interrogate the maids in the scullery, where the air was thick with steam and gossip. A young woman named Mary, with eyes as sharp as broken glass, mentioned hearing weeping near the staircase on several evenings. Was it recent? Wimsey inquired. Mostly after dark, sir. Right after supper. Quiet, like someone trying not to be heard. And the household's reaction to such nocturnal sobbing? Mary shrugged. They say it's the wind or the house settling. Ghosts, some call it, but no one wants to get involved. Wimsey arched a brow. Ghosts, eh? How convenient for those who wish to hide secrets beneath the veneer of superstition. The vicar, passing nearby, coughed nervously. Wimsey took the opportunity to quiz him on parish records more deeply. It was then that the faintest inconsistency revealed itself. An entry for a Reginald Carter, a man absent from the estate's current roles, listed as a frequent visitor in the months before Sir Cedric's death, a name to add to the roster. Wimsey reflected on the rattle and the child, the hidden bones, and now a mysterious visitor with no clear motive. The pieces refused to fit comfortably. Back in the drawing-room, as evening shadows thickened, Lady Astwyth produced an old family portrait, dusty and sombre, featuring a young woman whose eyes seemed too bright for the grim surroundings. Is this Edith Cramwell? Wimsey asked, pointing. The lady nodded. A likeness, yes. She was often mistaken for a member of the family, though she was never more than a servant. Wimsey's eyes lingered. And yet, here she is immortalized, among the gentry. Odd, no? Lady Astwyth sighed. She was Sir Cedric's favourite, but favourites come with complications. Complications, Wimsey repeated thoughtfully. The night deepened, and with it the sense that Astwyth Hall held its breath, waiting for the inevitable unravelling. Wimsey's mind raced through the gathered facts. A hidden child, a missing woman, a broken family, strange visitors, and a clock that no longer kept proper time. All the world is a stage, he murmured, half to himself, and every player must reveal their part before the final curtain falls. The game was afoot. As the early morning light spilled hesitantly through the tall, mullioned windows of Astwyth Hall's library, Lord Peter Wimsey found himself once more perched on the window seat, though now with a fresh sense of urgency. The night's shadows had lifted, but the house itself seemed still to harbour secrets not yet willing to emerge into daylight. Wimsey's gaze rested upon the grandfather clock in the corner, a stately and solemn presence that, as he had noted, no longer kept the hours with reliable precision. There was a curious thing about clocks, he often mused, how they marked not only the passage of time, but the subtle fractures in human affairs. A clock out of sync could mean a dozen things: neglect, mischief, or something more deliberate. The slow, almost mournful toll of Astwyth's bell last evening was less a summons than a warning. The vicar, Reverend Thistlethwaite, had arrived. Punctually, his usually composed expression marred by a faint shadow of apprehension, Wimsey welcomed him with a nod. Reverend, I believe we must reconsider the schedule of certain household activities, Wimsey began. Specifically, the times at which individuals claim to have been occupied or absent. Our little clock, though untrustworthy in its strikes, may still hold clues to a puzzle larger than its own mechanism. The vicar adjusted his spectacles, a gesture betraying his habitual discomfort with matters outside the strictly ecclesiastical. Of course, my lord, I confess my own ignorance of these mechanical curiosities, but if it aids the investigation, indeed it does. Time, after all, is a most exacting master. Whimsy smiled thinly, then continued. I have been reviewing the accounts of the household staff, and there appears a troubling inconsistency regarding the times certain doors were locked or unlocked last evening. The key to the northern wing, where the old stairwell conceals its secrets, was reported to have been secured by the housekeeper, Mrs. Vickery, promptly at 9 o'clock. Mrs. Vickery, who had joined them silently, stiffened slightly but said nothing. Yet, Whimsy went on, several witnesses recall lights and noises from that very wing after 9, suggesting the door was either unlocked or left ajar. Would you care to explain this, Mrs. Vickery? Her face betrayed the faintest twitch of unease before she answered, voice measured. My lord, I lock the door every night at 9, as instructed. If the door was open afterward, I know nothing of it. Perhaps a servant forgot. Whimsy's eyes narrowed, but he gave her the benefit of doubt for the moment. Very well. Now let us consider the nephew, Lord Quentin, who, as we have heard, was notably disgruntled with the family's disposition of Sir Cedric's estate. Lady Astwyth, who had been listening from a nearby chair, bristled. Quentin is hardly the villain you make him out to be. He's been more the victim of circumstance than of any malicious intent. Whimsy inclined his head politely. Of course, Lady Astwyth, but motive is often less about villainy and more about desperation. He paused, recalling a remark made by the young maid Mary about the weeping near the staircase. Quentin claims to have been in his chambers writing letters until well past 10 last night, Whimsy said thoughtfully. Yet, several servants overheard faint sobbing from the corridor near the northern wing at around that time. Coincidence, possibly, but then one must ask, who would cry in such secrecy, and why? Miss Liddell, ever the diligent observer, spoke up. I asked the cook this morning about the household's reaction to these sounds. She mentioned that Edith Cramwell was often said to have been seen near the old staircase, long after her dismissal, almost as a restless spirit, but I suspect the superstitions mask a very human presence. Indeed, Miss Liddell, Whimsy agreed, ghost stories are the convenient cloak for what we do not wish to admit. Let us consider, then, the man with the spectacles, Dr. Reginald Carruthers, as the parish records name him. Reverend Thistlethwaite nodded gravely. He was the household physician in the late 1890s, but, as you know, he left abruptly after Sir Cedric's death. No one speaks much of him now. Odd, Whimsy mused, that the man who was charged with the health of this house and its people should vanish without trace at precisely the moment the bones beneath the staircase were laid to rest. And yet, it is not the disappearance, but the circumstances that interest me. He turned to the assembled company. We must examine the possibility that Edith Cramwell's child, stillborn or otherwise, was not the sole occupant of that hidden grave. The spectacles suggest another individual, possibly male, whose presence there was deliberately concealed. Lady Astwyth gasped softly. Are you suggesting a murder beneath my very floors? Whimsy gave a faint, sardonic smile. I am suggesting that beneath these polished floors lie secrets more tangled than mere superstition can explain. Secrets born of jealousy, despair, and perhaps misplaced loyalty. The vicar rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Then, my lord, we must look beyond the obvious. Is there any record of another visitor to Astwyth Hall during that troubled time? Whimsy said, here we approach the heart of the matter. He produced a small ledger from his coat pocket, worn and creased. This was found tucked beneath the floorboards near the northern stairwell. A visitor's register, perhaps? Or a personal diary. The handwriting is faint but legible in parts. He passed the book to Miss Liddell, who read aloud hesitantly. Reginald Carter, August 12, 1897. Arrival at Astwyth Hall for urgent consultation with Sir Cedric. Confidential matters to be discussed. Whimsy's eyes glittered. A man of the same first name as Dr. Carruthers, yet different in surname. Could this Reginald Carter be an alias, or another figure entirely? Another visitor, Lady Astwyth asked. "I've never heard the name." "Nor have I," Wimsey admitted. "But the timing aligns curiously with the disappearance of Edith Cramwell and the construction of this very staircase." He stood abruptly, eyes blazing with the thrill of the chase. "We must seek out more about this, Mr. Carter, perhaps among the village records or in the memories of those who linger." Still in Astwyth's shadow, the company dispersed, each absorbed in their own speculation, but Wimsey remained rooted in thought. The ghostly sobbing, the misplaced salver, the broken clock, and now this mysterious Reginald, each thread was a stitch in a tapestry woven tight with deceit. As he prepared to leave for the village, his mind replayed a phrase from Shakespeare he often found appropriate in such tangled affairs. "Though this be madness, yet there is method in't." Indeed, beneath the madness of superstition and sorrow lay a method, one that Wimsey was determined to uncover before the Hall's secrets could claim another victim. Wimsey's journey to the village was accompanied by the familiar patter of early morning rain, a steady drizzle that lent the landscape a muted, melancholic tone. Astwyth's tightly clustered cottages seemed even more withdrawn under the sodden sky, their thatched roofs glistening with dampness, as though unwilling to betray the secrets held by the grand house on the hill. The village itself was quaint, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, and yet, paradoxically, also the setting for silences that spoke volumes. Peter alighted from his motor car near the modest post office and proceeded, on foot toward the small cluster of shops and the parish hall. His thoughts, as always, darted between the facts and fragments gathered so far, the displaced bones, the broken clocks, the spectral sobbing, and the inscrutable visitor named Reginald Carter. It was to the parish clerk, an elderly man known as Mr. Hemsworth, that Wimsey resolved to first direct his inquiries. The clerk's office was a cramped, paper-strewn room redolent of old ink and musty ledgers. Mr. Hemsworth, a gaunt figure with a prodigious white moustache, looked up from his ledger with mild surprise but concealed interest when informed of Wimsey's presence. "Ah, Lord Peter, always a pleasure. How can the village records serve your investigative fancy today?" Hemsworth inquired, pushing his spectacles up the bridge of his nose. Wimsey smiled thinly. "I find myself intrigued by a certain Mr. Reginald Carter, purported visitor to Astwyth Hall around August 1897. Might your records shed any light on this gentleman's identity or purpose?" The clerk rubbed his chin thoughtfully, then nodded. "Reginald Carter, you say? Let me see." He rifled through a drawer before extracting a small bundle of documents tied with a faded ribbon. There was indeed a Carter registered as residing briefly in the village, though the particulars are scant. A man of medicine, it would appear. He lodged for several weeks in the summer of '97. Odd fellow by most accounts. Medicine? Wimsey raised an eyebrow. A doctor, then? Perhaps, Hemsworth agreed, though no official certification was found in the parish archives. He was reticent, kept to himself mostly. Rumours had it he was conducting some kind of private consultation with Sir Cedric Astwyth. The mention of Sir Cedric drew Wimsey's attention sharply. Was there anything unusual about his visits, or his departure? Hemsworth hesitated. Well, he vanished rather abruptly shortly before Sir Cedric's death. Some said he left in a hurry, others whispered of a scandal, but no one could say for certain. "A scandal?" Wimsey's voice was dry yet edged with interest. "And what nature of scandal might that be, Mr. Hemsworth?" "Ah, that's where the gossip becomes less reliable than the parish register. Some claimed Dr. Carter was involved, there with Edith Cramwell, the former maid, in ways that raised eyebrows. Others speculated on his experiments, medical or otherwise, involving the household." Wimsey nodded thoughtfully, filing away the information. The connection between Carter and Edith was too persistent to dismiss, especially with the grave concealed beneath the stairs. "Thank you, Mr. Hemsworth. Might you know where this Mr. Carter lodged during his stay?" Hemsworth tapped a finger on the ledger. "Yes, the Bluebell Cottage on the edge of the village, a small place vacant now." Wimsey resolved his course immediately. The cottage might yield more tangible clues than whispered rumours. As he approached, Bluebell Cottage, a modest, weather-worn dwelling set apart from the main village thoroughfare, Wimsey's sharp eye noted the unevenness of the garden path and the faint scent of damp earth mingling with the mustiness of closed rooms. The front door was ajar, creaking gently in the breeze, inviting inspection. Inside, the rooms were sparse but orderly, save for a scattering of papers on a writing desk by the window. Whimsy's fingers brushed lightly over several sheets, revealing hastily scrawled notes interspersed with anatomical sketches and references to local herbal remedies. One page bore a single cryptic line: "The child's silence is the key to the truth beneath the hall." A sudden sound at the window caused Whimsy to spin, hand reaching instinctively toward his coat. Outside stood Mary, the young maid from Asquith Hall, her expression a mixture of apprehension and resolve. "Mary," Whimsy said quietly, "I trust you did not come to frighten an old man in his solitude." She shook her head. "No, my lord, I wished only to speak with you. I overheard something last night." "Do tell," Whimsy invited, eyes narrowing in anticipation. "It was Lord Quentin," she whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "He was speaking with Sir Reginald late into the night. They met near the northern wing, the old staircase. I heard the word inheritance and something about securing the future." Whimsy's mind quickened. The tangled web of motives grew denser. Sir Reginald, the new husband, was not merely a fortune hunter, he was conspiring in the shadows with the disgruntled nephew. "Thank you, Mary, you have been most brave." He glanced at the notes again. "The child's silence. Perhaps there is more here than mere superstition." Back at Asquith Hall, Whimsy sought an audience with Sir Reginald. The man was found in the smoking room, a cigar smouldering between his fingers, his posture relaxed, yet watchful. "Sir Reginald," Whimsy began, "it has come to my attention that you and Lord Quentin have been engaged in rather secret discussions. Care to enlighten me as to the nature of these?" Sir Reginald's smile was thin, edged with a hint of disdain. "Lord Peter, you do me the honour of your company and the suspicion that comes with it. I assure you, my conversations are my own, and their subjects none of your concern. On the contrary," Whimsy said with deliberate calm, "I find matters concerning the inheritance and security of Asquith Hall of profound interest, especially given the recent disturbances." The man's eyes flickered. "The family estate is best left undisturbed, I assure you. Some stones are better left unturned." Whimsy's reply was a wry smile. "Indeed, Sir Reginald, but I am not one to ignore stones when they begin to bleed." The room fell into a charged silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the ticking of a clock, whose hands, unlike that of the hall's ancient timepiece, moved with precise regularity. Whimsy left the smoking room with the conviction that the heart of this mystery beat not in hidden bones alone, but in the ambitions and fears of the living. The interplay between Sir Reginald's greed and Lord Quentin's resentment was the combustible tinder awaiting a spark. The day waned, and with it the patience of those assembled at Asquith. The quiet sobbing remained an unanswered question, the misplaced salver a symbol of fractured trust, and the ghostly spectres of Edith Cramwell and Reginald Carter hovered just beyond reach. Whimsy's thoughts turned again to the staircase and the secret beneath it. There was one more avenue to explore, the housekeeper, Mrs. Vickery. Her steadfast denial of unlocking the northern door after 9 would soon be tested against the unyielding precision of time and testimony. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the mullioned windows, Whimsy understood that the dance was far from over. Every detail, no matter how trivial it seemed, was a step in the choreography of truth, and he was determined to lead. For in this house of secrets, the clock was ticking, and beneath the staircase, the silence awaited its final voice. The waning. Light of day pooled in the corners of Asquith Hall's vast drawing-room, where Whimsy found Mrs. Vickery seated stiffly by the fire, her hands folded in her lap as if bracing against some inward chill. The housekeeper's face bore the marks of long years of service, fine lines etched about a mouth that rarely smiled, and eyes perpetually shadowed by a sense of duty mingled with unease. She met Whimsy's gaze without flinching, though the faintest tremor betrayed a tension beneath her composed exterior. "My dear Mrs. Vickery," Whimsy began, "we must revisit the question of the northern door. You assured me rather firmly that it was locked at 9 o'clock precisely last night. Yet, as I have come to understand, there are conflicting testimonies indicating activity beyond that hour in the very wing it secures." Mrs. Vickery's lips pressed into a thin line. "I am certain, my lord." I performed my rounds, secured all doors as I was instructed. "If others were careless, I cannot be held responsible." "Of course," Wimsey said mildly, "I do not imply negligence. But the matter of the misplaced salver found only this. Morning in the servants' quarters rather than its accustomed place in the dining room adds an intriguing wrinkle. Such an object does not wander on its own." The housekeeper's eyes flickered ever so slightly at the mention of the salver. "That is quite true, my lord. The salver is prized by the family, and its absence caused no small alarm. I had thought it simply misplaced in the flurry after the tragedy." "Indeed," Wimsey agreed. "Yet, Mrs. Vickery, you must appreciate that such disorder is unusual in a household maintained as scrupulously as this one." She nodded reluctantly. "Yes, my lord. I am interested in the timing of your rounds. If you locked the northern door at 9, then who could have entered or left afterward?" Mrs. Vickery's composure cracked for a moment. She began, then hesitated. "There was a noise shortly after 9. I thought it the wind at first, but then I heard footsteps, soft, hurried. I did not investigate, fearing to disturb the master's household unnecessarily. Did you hear any voices? Any distinguishable sound that might identify the intruder?" "No, my lord, only the footsteps, light and fleeting." Wimsey tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the arm of his chair. "Light footsteps. Perhaps a woman's?" Her eyes darkened. "Possibly." He rose, walking slowly toward the window, the fog gathering outside lending the world a silvery obscurity. "Mrs. Vickery, might I inquire about the maid's quarters? Is it true that Edith Cramwell was often seen lurking near the old staircase after her dismissal?" The housekeeper's mouth twitched in a faint grimace. "Yes, she was troubled after her dismissal, often begging for work or lodging. The family was unwilling. Rumors circulated about her disappearance, but no one knew what truly became of her." Wimsey's gaze shifted to the staircase itself, the narrow ancient wooden steps winding upward like a dark serpent. "And what of the child? There are whispers that Edith bore a child in secret. Have you any knowledge of this?" Mrs. Vickery swallowed hard. "There was talk. A child born still or lost soon after birth. No one wished to speak of it openly. Such tragedies do not vanish so easily," Wimsey said softly. "They linger, like shadows beneath the stairs." He paused before turning back to her. I'm most intrigued by the presence of Reginald Carter, or rather Reginald Carter's connection to the household. The notes found in Bluebell Cottage suggest a man involved not merely in medicine, but in something more arcane, or at least more secret." Mrs. Vickery's eyes narrowed in sudden suspicion. "Are you suggesting there is something darker afoot?" "My lord?" "Not darker, merely concealed." Wimsey smiled faintly. "And it is my belief that the child's fate, the visitor's mysterious disappearance, and the late-night movements near the staircase are strands of the same knot." She drew a breath, then spoke in a low voice. "I have always believed that the old staircase was a place of sorrow. It was built hastily, almost in secrecy, not long after Sir Cedric's death. I have heard from some of the older servants that it replaced a more ancient stair, one that was said to creak with voices at night." "Voices?" Wimsey's interest was piqued. "Yes, perhaps the sobbing you and others have heard. Some dismissed it as wind or rats, but others believed it, the spirit of Edith or the child unsettled in its grave." Wimsey gave a wry smile. "As charming as a ghost story, Mrs. Vickery, it may be, but we are not in pursuit of spectres tonight." "No, my lord," she agreed solemnly. "Only the living." Wimsey left her quarters with a renewed sense of purpose, the layers of the mystery folding themselves ever tighter around the ancient house. Returning to the library, he reviewed the timelines once more, mapping the movements of the various players against the shifting hours. The clock on the mantel ticked unevenly, its hands stubbornly refusing to align with reality. Wimsey's mind traced back the observations of the servants, the discrepancies in their statements, the shifting tales of footsteps and whispered words in corridors. It was clear that some part of the story had been withheld, intentionally or not. His thoughts returned to the misplaced salver, a trivial object that had become symbolic, a silent witness to the turmoil beneath the surface of Astwith Hall. It had been removed or hidden deliberately, perhaps to conceal evidence or to divert suspicion. There was also the matter of Lord Quentin's agitation. The young man's resentful glances and furtive conversations with Sir Reginald hinted at motives far beyond mere familial disappointment. Their alliance, whether by mutual interest or coercion, was a key to understanding the night's events. Wimsey's reverie was interrupted by the soft sound of footsteps approaching. It was Mary, the maid, her expression a blend of apprehension and determination. "My lord," she whispered, "I have something to tell you." He gestured for her to sit. "I overheard more last night," she confessed. "After Lord Quentin left Sir Reginald's side, he went alone to the northern wing. I followed discreetly. I saw him enter the door that should have been locked. Moments later, I heard a muffled sound, a scuffle perhaps, then silence." Wimsey's eyes gleamed. "An excellent observation, Mary. And did you see what Lord Quentin did afterward?" She shook her head. "No, my lord. I was too frightened to remain." Wimsey stood, the pieces beginning to coalesce in his mind like an intricate puzzle finally yielding its pattern. It appears then that the lock on the northern door was compromised after 9 o'clock, as suspected. And Lord Quentin's nocturnal visit may be central to the mystery. The night's shadows deepened beyond the windows, as though the house itself awaited the revelation that would finally unlock its secrets. Wimsey felt the weight of the house's silence pressing closer. Beneath the staircase the past murmured, and soon he promised himself the truth would speak clearly at last. Wimsey's thoughts, sharpened by Mary's revelation, turned immediately to the southern wing of Astvith Hall, where the old servants' quarters abutted the twisting corridors beneath the staircase. The architecture there was anachronistic, almost grotesquely out of place. Narrow passageways, low ceilings, and walls thick with layers of peeling paint and fading wallpaper. It was an area usually left to ghosts and echoes, a place best forgotten, except for those whose tasks required such unwelcome intimacy. "Mary, you have done well to share this," Wimsey said gently, rising to his feet. "I shall require you to accompany me as I inspect this northern door and the route Lord Quentin took. Your eyes and ears will be indispensable." Mary nodded, her face pale but determined, and together they made their way through the dim corridors. The silence of the house had thickened into something tangible, a quietude so profound it felt conspiratorial. Even the ticking of the library clock seemed distant here, swallowed by the weight of history and hidden stories. At the northern door, Wimsey knelt to examine the lock. It was a sturdy brass mechanism, tarnished with age but well cared for. Yet, upon closer inspection, there was a subtle, almost imperceptible scratch along the edge of the keyhole. "Here, Mary," he murmured, brushing his finger lightly over the mark. "Someone has forced this lock, not with brute strength but with the careful precision of a practiced hand. It suggests intention, even desperation." Mary glanced nervously down the hallway, then back to Wimsey. "Could Lord Quentin have done this himself?" "Possibly," Wimsey said, "though I would wager it was done earlier to allow easy access when he arrived." The detective's mind raced ahead, reconstructing the timeline. Lord Quentin's restlessness, the hurried footsteps after 9, the muffled sounds Mary heard, all fit into a sequence growing steadily clearer, yet the motive remained elusive. "Let us follow the path he took," Wimsey said, motioning down the corridor toward the servants' quarters. They proceeded with measured steps, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows that clung to the warped walls. As they approached the narrow door beneath the staircase, Wimsey stopped abruptly. This door, he said, was not in the original plans of the house. It was installed later, probably to conceal something, an entrance or perhaps a secret. "Room." He tested the handle, which yielded to a cautious turn. The door creaked open, revealing a cramped chamber cluttered with forgotten relics, dusty trunks, a moth-eaten chair, and faded photographs stacked carelessly in a corner. But it was what lay beneath the floorboards that caught Wimsey's eye. "Observe," he whispered, kneeling to lift a loose plank. Beneath it lay a small leather-bound notebook, its edges worn and pages yellowed with age. "Could this belong to Edith Cramwell?" Mary asked softly. "It is a distinct possibility," Wimsey answered, carefully opening the book. The neat handwriting was surprisingly lucid, detailing daily entries that began with mundane notes, but soon darkened with troubling thoughts. The notebook chronicled Edith's descent into despair, the isolation after her dismissal, her fear of discovery, and references to a child hidden from the world. More curiously, there were mentions of Sir Reginald's visits, cryptic comments on medicine and necessity, and veiled accusations of control and manipulation. Whimsy read a passage aloud. "He watches with eyes that do not see, speaks with lips that deceive. The child is no longer safe, hidden beneath the shadow of the stairs where silence may be its only refuge." He closed the book gently. This confirms much. Edith feared Sir Reginald, suspected him of dark intentions toward her child. If the child survived, it might explain the nighttime movements and the muffled sounds Mary described. Mary shivered. But why would Lord Quentin be involved? He is no relation to Edith. "Blood is not always the measure of connection," Whimsy replied. "There are ties forged in secrecy and alliances born of fear or guilt." The detective's mind returned to the strange dynamic between Quentin and Sir Reginald, the whispered arguments overheard in the library, the furtive glances exchanged. There was something deeper, something not yet spoken. "Tell me, Mary," Whimsy said, "did you notice any unusual interactions between Lord Quentin and the servants? Any strange requests or changes in behavior?" Mary thought for a moment. "He has been colder than usual, more abrupt with the staff. And there was one thing. Last week he asked for the keys to the old wine cellar, though it has been locked for years." "A wine cellar locked for years," Whimsy repeated thoughtfully. "And yet he sought access. Interesting." They left the cramped chamber, closing the door softly behind them, and made their way back to the drawing room where Whimsy pondered the implications. The child, hidden beneath the staircase, was not a mere spectre of the past, but a tangible thread tying together the present mystery. He took a cigar from his pocket, lit it with deliberate care, and exhaled a plume of smoke that curled like a question mark into the dim air. "There is something else, Mary," he mused aloud. "The missing salver, the altered lock, the nocturnal footsteps. They are all pieces of a puzzle designed to obscure, not reveal. Whoever orchestrated this intended to mislead, to protect a secret that must not be unearthed." Mary's eyes widened. "Do you think the child is still here, alive?" Whimsy's gaze darkened. "I do not know. But the next step is clear. We must seek out Lord Quentin and discover what he knows, what he fears." The clock struck 10, its chimes echoing hollowly through the halls. Outside, the fog had thickened, pressing like a living thing against the windows. The house seemed to hold its breath, awaiting the unveiling of truths long buried. As Whimsy prepared to confront the restless air, the atmosphere grew taut with unspoken menace. In Astvith Hall, the shadows were no longer merely echoes. They were warnings, and somewhere beneath the staircase, secrets waited to be dragged into the light. Whimsy found Lord Quentin in the library's high-backed chair, the firelight flickering over his restless features. The young man's eyes darted nervously as Whimsy entered, and for a moment the weight of unspoken guilt hung between them, like a palpable fog. "My lord," Whimsy began, adopting a tone that was both gently admonishing and meticulously courteous, "I trust the evening finds you in sufficient health, though I fear the events of recent days have left their mark." Quentin shifted, offering a tight smile. "I am well enough, thank you, Lord Peter. The house has been unsettled, to say the least." "Indeed," Whimsy agreed, easing himself into the chair opposite. "Unsettled, yes, and one might say so are the facts surrounding the northern wing, an area about which you took a particular interest last night." Quentin's eyes flickered toward the closed door that led to the servants' corridor, then back to Whimsy's unwavering gaze. "I confess, I needed to see if the old wine cellar door was truly locked. It had been some time since I was here." "Curious, that," Whimsy murmured, steepling his fingers. "You see, I have learned that the lock was indeed tampered with after hours. It is most unusual for a young gentleman such as yourself to meddle in matters concerning the cellar, which has long been disused. May I ask what drew you there?" Quentin's jaw tightened. "There are family matters best kept private. The cellar holds remnants of the past that I wish to examine, perhaps find answers for myself." Whimsy inclined his head slowly. "Ah, the past. A recurring spectre in this house, I find. And speaking of the past, I have come upon some curious documents hidden away beneath the staircase. Diaries, it seems, belonging to one Edith Cramwell. Were you acquainted with Miss Cramwell, Lord Quentin? The younger man's face paled. Acquainted? Not in any formal sense, but I was aware of her presence, her dismissal, and the tragic circumstances surrounding her child. I confess, I feel a certain responsibility. Responsibility. That is a weighty word, Whimsy said. Do you care to elaborate? Quentin hesitated, then exhaled sharply. She was close to my late mother, and when she was dismissed under rather abrupt conditions, I feared for her welfare. The child, well, it was my mother's wish that the child be protected, hidden away if necessary. Whimsy's brows lifted. Hidden away beneath the staircase, perhaps? Yes, Quentin admitted. There was a small chamber there, forgotten by most. Edith confided in me that she entrusted the child's care to a trusted servant, though which one I cannot say. Fascinating, Whimsy said softly. And this servant, have you any suspicion who it might be? Quentin's eyes lowered. I had hoped it was Mrs. Vickery, but her demeanour suggests otherwise. And the maids are too young to have been involved. I fear I have no clear answer. Then perhaps we should revisit the servants' testimonies with that in mind, Whimsy proposed. Might I ask where you were between 9 and 10 last night? Quentin's fingers twitched nervously. I was in my chambers, reading. Alone. Alone. Whimsy repeated, his tone laced with gentle skepticism. Yet Mary, the maid, has observed your movements near the northern door shortly after 9. Quentin swallowed, his composure slipping. I admit, I went to the corridor, but only to retrieve a letter I had dropped earlier. Ah, the letter, Whimsy pressed. May I see it? Quentin hesitated, then withdrew a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. The handwriting was elegant, but hurried. Whimsy unfolded the note and read silently. Meet me beneath the stairs at 10. The truth cannot remain buried any longer. He looked up, meeting Quentin's gaze. A curious summons, would you not agree? Quentin nodded grimly. I do not know who wrote it. I found it slipped under my door this morning. Whimsy leaned back, the wheels turning in his mind. And what truth do you believe lies beneath the stairs, my lord? Quentin's voice was barely above a whisper. That Edith's child survived. That it is hidden somewhere in this house, perhaps even here tonight. Whimsy's eyes gleamed. Then we are in accord, though I suspect there are others with vested interests who would prefer the secret remain concealed. A sudden knock interrupted them. The door opened to reveal Detective Inspector Parker, his face grave but respectful. Lord. Peter, Parker said, there has been a development. The missing salver has been found hidden in a secret compartment of the wine cellar door. Whimsy exchanged a glance with Quentin. This confirms my suspicion. The cellar door is no mere door, it conceals a passage or room. We must see it at once. Together, the trio descended the narrow stairs toward the wine cellar, the air growing cooler and heavier with each step. The secret compartment was revealed by a clever mechanism, a false panel that swung inward, revealing a narrow passage. Remarkable, Whimsy murmured, shining his lantern down the dark corridor. This must be the space Edith referred to, the refuge for the child. They advanced cautiously, the walls closing in around them. At the end of the passage, a small chamber lay in semi-darkness, the floor littered with discarded toys and a threadbare blanket. Suddenly, a faint rustling came from the shadows, followed by a soft whimper. Whimsy held his breath as a small figure emerged, a child, wide-eyed and trembling, clutching a worn doll. Child of Edith Cramwell? Whimsy inquired gently. The child nodded, too frightened to speak. Quentin stepped forward, tears glistening. My God, she lives. As the reality settled, Whimsy's mind turned to the broader picture. This child's survival explained much. The secret meetings, the furtive movements, the desperate attempts to hide and protect. Yet, who had attempted to silence the child's existence? Who had forced the lock, mislaid the salver, and created the nocturnal disturbances? These questions hung in the air as the trio led the child back toward the hall. Outside, the fog pressed close once more, but inside Astwith Hall, Shadows began to recede. The first glimmers of truth had pierced the darkness beneath the staircase, and Lord Peter Wimsey, as ever, was quietly poised to unravel the last threads of the intricate tapestry. The discovery of the child beneath the staircase seemed to lift a heavy veil from the ancient gloom of Asquith Hall. Yet, as the fragile figure was carried back into the warmth of the drawing-room, the gravity of the enigma remained undiminished. Wimsey, eyes alight with a tempered excitement, regarded the gathered assembly. Lord Quentin, Detective Inspector Parker, and the now visibly shaken household staff. "We have pierced the first veil," Wimsey began, his voice a calm ripple, cutting through the tension. "But our work is far from complete. This child's presence explains the urgency and secrecy, but it also opens new questions. Chief among them, who has sought to keep this secret by such desperate means?" Quentin, still pale from the ordeal, nodded. "The locks forced, the salver concealed. These were not accidents. Someone within these walls intended to bury this child's existence." Wimsey's gaze swept the room, lingering briefly on Mrs. Vickery, the housekeeper, whose usual imperious composure now seemed to falter. "Mrs. Vickery," Wimsey said, "you have been with the household for many years, yes?" She nodded stiffly. "Indeed, Lord Peter, since before the late master's marriage." "And you were present during Edith Cramwell's employment?" "Yes, sir. A loyal and devoted woman, though circumstances forced her departure." Her voice was tight. "Did you know of this child's existence before now?" Mrs. Vickery's eyes flickered away, an almost imperceptible tremor betraying her calm facade. "I was told to keep quiet, a promise made to my late mistress." Wimsey's lips curled into a faint smile, not unkind, but incisive. "A promise that has weighed heavily, I imagine." "Indeed, sir," she admitted. Detective Inspector Parker stepped forward. "If I may, Lady Mary's testimony hinted at footsteps and whispered conversations near the servants' quarters. Could these movements belong to someone guarding or perhaps hiding the child?" Mary, still standing quietly near the hearth, nodded. "I heard voices too hushed for me to catch, but the fear in them was unmistakable." Wimsey folded the diary Edith Cramwell had written. "These entries mention a trusted servant tasked with protecting the child. Mrs. Vickery, might this responsibility have fallen to you or another?" The housekeeper hesitated, then sighed. "It was Thomas, the butler, a stern man but fiercely loyal to the family and the child. He would visit the chamber nightly to ensure all was well." A new light dawned on Wimsey's face. "Thomas, and yet he has been oddly absent from our inquiries until now. Might we locate him?" Just then a faint noise came from the hallway. Heavy footsteps approaching. The door swung open, revealing a tall, gaunt man whose eyes were shadowed with exhaustion and something darker. "Guilt, Thomas," Wimsey said simply. The butler's gaze settled on the assembled group. "I suppose my hour has come." Wimsey gestured toward a chair, and Thomas sank into it with a weary sigh. "You were entrusted with the care of Edith's child," Wimsey began gently. "And yet someone forced the lock to the chamber, and attempts were made to conceal the salver. Did you witness or suspect anyone attempting to interfere with your charge?" Thomas's fingers clenched tightly. "Yes. It was Sir Reginald. He never accepted the child's existence, fearing it would ruin the family's reputation. When Edith was dismissed, the tension grew. Sir Reginald was a man who brooked no opposition. And the attempts to silence or hide the child," Thomas's voice dropped. "I found signs of forced entry one night. I confronted Sir Reginald, but he threatened me, said the child must vanish. I feared for my position and the child's safety." Wimsey's eyes narrowed. "Yet Sir Reginald died recently. Was it not by natural causes?" "Officially, yes," Thomas confirmed, "but the night he died I heard a struggle near the wine cellar. There was a scream, and then silence. Mary gasped softly. Could that have been when Lord Quentin discovered the child's presence?" "Possibly," Wimsey mused. "The timing aligns." Detective Parker made notes briskly. "And the letter Lord Quentin received this morning, do you know anything of its origin?" Thomas shook his head. "No, sir, it was not from me. Someone else knows the truth." Wimsey stood, pacing thoughtfully. "This raises a crucial question. Who, besides Sir Reginald and yourself, would have a motive to keep this secret buried so deeply?" The room was silent, save for the crackling fire. Then, unexpectedly, Mrs. Vickery stepped forward. "If I may, Lord Peter, there is one person who benefits more than anyone else, the heir, Lord Quentin." A murmur rippled through the room. Wimsey regarded her calmly. "Explain, Mrs. Vickery," she swallowed. "The child is not merely an innocent secret. If the truth were known, it would jeopardize Lord Quentin's claim to the estate. There are whispers, questions of legitimacy." Quentin's face paled, but he said nothing. Wimsey's gaze sharpened. "Are you suggesting that Lord Quentin might have sought to suppress this secret to preserve his inheritance?" "No, sir," Mrs. Vickery replied quickly. "I only mean that someone close to him, perhaps a guardian or advisor, might have acted to protect the family name at any cost." The detective rubbed his chin thoughtfully. A guardian acting behind the scenes. This could explain the letter summoning Lord Quentin and the calculated measures to conceal the child's existence. Thomas nodded grimly. "I feared such interference. I confronted one of Lord Quentin's associates about the child, but was met with threats." Wimsey turned to the young lord. "Lord Quentin, I must ask candidly, are there individuals within your circle whose loyalty might be questionable, whose methods might be less than honorable?" Quentin swallowed hard. "There is one. Mr. Grayson, my solicitor. He has handled family matters for years and often counsels me, but I have never suspected him of ill intent." "Yet his interests may not align perfectly with yours," Wimsey said. "Loyalty, after all, can be a cloak for ambition," Detective Parker concurred. "We shall need to speak with Mr. Grayson promptly." The firelight flickered once more, casting long shadows that danced ominously. The layers of Astwith. Hall's secret seemed to peel away slowly, revealing a web of protection, deceit, and human frailty. Wimsey's mind raced through the implications: the child's survival, Sir Reginald's opposition, the hidden letters, and now the possibility of an unseen hand manipulating events to safeguard wealth and status. He looked toward Quentin. "My lord, this investigation is far from over, but with patience and careful scrutiny, I believe we shall unmask the truth beneath the veneer of propriety." Quentin nodded, his expression resolute. Outside, the night deepened, and the fog crept once more through the estate grounds like a slow-moving tide, but within the walls of Astwith Hall, the tides of revelation had begun to turn. And Lord Peter Wimsey, ever the master of subtlety and precision, was preparing to strike the final blow against the shadows that had long held sway. The game was afoot, and the end was near. The following morning dawned with a brittle chill that seemed in keeping with the pall cast over Astwith Hall. The household stirred under the weight of whispered speculations and uneasy glances. Lord Peter Wimsey, however, was as composed as ever, his countenance betraying nothing of the storm of thoughts occupying his keen mind. After a brief, almost perfunctory breakfast, Wimsey requested an immediate audience with Mr. Grayson, Lord Quentin's solicitor and long-standing family advisor. It was not merely the convenience of proximity that dictated this summons, but a carefully calculated step, a measured advance in a game of subtle moves and counter-moves. Grayson arrived promptly, his appearance immaculate, though his manner bore a faint edge of wariness. He was a man of middle years, with sharp, calculating eyes that seemed to miss little, yet there was a flicker of something less assured beneath the polished exterior. "Lord Peter," he said, inclining his head with practiced civility, "to what do I owe this unexpected visit?" Wimsey's smile was thin, his voice deliberately casual. "Mr. Grayson, I trust you will forgive my directness, but matters have arisen which require your candid attention. They concern the late Sir Reginald, the child discovered within the concealed chamber, and certain peculiar correspondences that have come to light." Grayson's eyes narrowed slightly. "I am aware of the child's existence, though I regret the family has been plunged into such turmoil. Sir Reginald's passing was unfortunate, but I assure you my conduct has always been in the family's best interests." "Indeed," Wimsey said, folding his hands, "yet it is precisely the family's interests that compel me to ask. Have you taken steps, perhaps beyond your formal duties, to manage, or shall we say contain, the knowledge of this child?" Grayson's composure wavered, a brief flash of something akin to disdain crossing his features. "Containment is a rather strong term, Lord Peter. I have sought only to protect Lord Quentin's inheritance and reputation, which are, after all, entwined with the estate's future." "Quite so," Wimsey nodded thoughtfully. "But at what cost? I understand a letter was sent this very morning urging Lord Quentin's return. Might you care to disclose its origin and intent?" Grayson's lips pressed into a thin line. "The letter was indeed from my hand. Lord Quentin must be apprised of the situation directly. There can be no delay." "Then you admit to orchestrating a response to this discovery," Wimsey said gently. "Would you care to explain your motivations in greater detail?" The solicitor sighed, his practiced mask slipping momentarily to reveal the fatigue of prolonged duplicity. "The family's standing depends on appearances, Lord Peter. The revelation of an illegitimate child would wreak havoc, not only socially, but financially. I took it upon myself to intervene where necessary, and did." "These interventions include the actions that led to Sir Reginald's death?" Wimsey asked, voice calm but insistent. Grayson's expression hardened. "I had no part in that unfortunate event. Sir Reginald was a complicated man. We disagreed on many points, but I would never stoop to murder." Wimsey allowed a brief pause, then pressed on. "Yet you were aware of the child and endeavored to keep the secret, even at the expense of those who sought to protect it." "Yes," Grayson admitted, "but always with the aim of preserving the family's legacy." "Then you see yourself as a custodian, albeit one willing to tread moral grey areas?" "Precisely." Wimsey leaned back, his eyes gleaming with the light of discovery. "And yet, Mr. Grayson, it was not you who forced the locks on the concealed chamber, nor who sent the threatening letters to Thomas the butler." "No," Grayson said, voice low. "I was kept at arm's length from those more direct measures." "Curious," Wimsey mused. "It suggests a third party, perhaps someone acting independently, but with knowledge of your intentions." Grayson looked uneasy. "Who could that be?" Wimsey's smile was slow, deliberate. "That, Mr. Grayson, is precisely what we must uncover." After the solicitor's departure, Wimsey and Detective Inspector Parker convened to collate their findings. The web of secrets was intricate, the strands tangled with loyalties and fears. "It seems," Wimsey said, "that our mystery expands rather than contracts. The child's survival is secured, but the forces arrayed to suppress this truth are more numerous than anticipated." Parker nodded. "And the timing of Sir Reginald's death, coupled with the forced entry and threats to Thomas, point to desperation. Whoever acted did so with knowledge and determination." "Indeed," Wimsey replied. "But there is a detail I find troubling. This diary of Edith Cramwell's. It speaks not only of protection, but of shadows within shadows." Parker raised an eyebrow. "You suspect a deeper conspiracy?" "Not conspiracy, necessarily," Wimsey corrected. "More a complex layering of human motives, fear, shame, love, and the instinct for survival." Their attention turned next to the household staff once more. Mrs. Vickery was summoned to account for the strange sounds Lady Mary had heard near the servants' quarters. Under gentle but persistent questioning, she disclosed that late at night, certain voices were heard discussing plans to move the child to a safer location. A move never realized. A plan aborted, Wimsey reflected. And by whom? Could this be the handiwork of the mysterious figure who sent the letter to Lord Quentin? Mary, watching silently, finally spoke. "There was someone else, a stranger I glimpsed once, tall, cloaked in black, who lingered near the stables. I thought—" "It odd but said nothing." "An unknown agent," Wimsey said, "possibly working against or for the family's interests." Turning to Thomas, Wimsey asked pointedly about any recent visitors or communications that might explain this shadowy figure. The butler recalled a man fitting the description, one who arrived under cover of dusk several nights ago and left without explanation. Parker exchanged a glance with Wimsey. "We must investigate further. If this stranger is part of the puzzle, he may hold the key to unraveling the final threads." The afternoon wore on with painstaking interviews and renewed scrutiny of the estate's geography. The soundproofed, Doors, the hidden staircases, the misaligned clocks, all now mapped meticulously against the unfolding timeline. Whimsy's mind worked like a fine watchmaker's, each cog clicking into place. The secret chamber, the child's concealment, Sir Reginald's demise, Grayson's complicity, and this mysterious visitor were all pieces of a grander mosaic. As dusk settled again over Astwith Hall, Whimsy requested the staff retire early. The drawing room was prepared for a demonstration, one designed to expose the invisible connections and hidden movements that had governed the household's dark nights. Lord Quentin and Detective Inspector Parker assembled, anticipation taut, in the air. Whimsy began quietly, recounting the known timeline, reenacting the evening of Sir Reginald's death with precise attention to detail, the ticking of the grandfather clock, the placement of the heavy curtains, the distant toll of the village bell. With a sudden flourish, he revealed a small mirror, previously unnoticed. This mirror, placed cleverly within the corridor, catches light and shadow in ways that distort perception. It is here that our stranger might have moved unseen, taking advantage of angles and silences. He paused, letting the implications settle before continuing. The soundproofing of the door was imperfect, just enough to muffle voices, but not. Footsteps. Those familiar with the household's habits could exploit this knowledge. Parker nodded slowly. So the intruder's movements, though concealed, left subtle traces detectable to the observant eye. Precisely, Whimsy affirmed. And it is those subtle traces that will lead us to our final revelation. The assembled group was silent, caught between apprehension and curiosity. Whimsy's gaze settled on Lord Quentin. My lord, tomorrow we will seek out this stranger and confront the truth he carries with him. Until then, I ask for your patience and discretion. As the firelight flickered once more, casting wavering shadows, the secret beneath the staircase no longer seemed a solitary enigma. It was a beacon drawing them inexorably toward the denouement, a climax woven from human frailty, cunning, and the inexorable logic of Lord Peter Whimsy's mind. The game, as he had said, was far from over. Yet the pieces were all on the board, and soon the invisible hand would be revealed. With the evening air growing crisp and the shadows lengthening across the ancient stones of Astwith Hall, Lord Peter Whimsy gathered the key players once more. In the great drawing room, an arena now heavy with anticipation and the silent weight of secrets waiting to be laid bare. The fire crackled as if in nervous accompaniment, throwing flickering patterns that seemed to mimic the complexity of the tale about to unfold. Whimsy stood impeccably composed, a gloved hand resting lightly on the arm of his chair. His eyes, sharp as a surgeon's scalpel, surveyed the assembled faces. Lord Quentin, Detective Inspector Parker, the weary solicitor Mr. Grayson, and even the stoic butler Thomas, whose countenance betrayed a hint of relief mingled with apprehension. My dear friends, Whimsy began, voice measured, we have traversed a labyrinth of half-truths, whispered fears, and carefully constructed illusions. The tangled web woven here at Astwith Hall might have remained forever obscured were it not for the steadfast observations of those who refused to accept appearances at face value. He paused, allowing the moment to settle. The concealed chamber beneath the staircase was, as we surmised, no mere curiosity but a refuge, an asylum for the child whose existence threatened to unravel the very fabric of this household's carefully guarded reputation. Glancing at Grayson, he continued, Mr. Grayson, you admitted to efforts aimed at preserving that reputation, even to the point of moral ambiguity. Yet you did not, as you insisted, orchestrate the violent events that followed. The solicitor's gaze hardened but remained fixed. The true architect of these darker deeds, Whimsy said, was one whose motives were both personal and profound. Sir Reginald's nephew, the ostensibly indifferent and sulking young man, was, in fact, the man cloaked in black who came and went unseen. A flicker of shock crossed Lord Quentin's face. This young man, Whimsy explained, discovered the existence of his half-brother, the child hidden beneath these very stairs, and, consumed by a jealousy born of both resentment and fear for his inheritance, took measures both desperate and violent. The forced entry, the threatening letters, the attempts to silence Thomas, each was a calculated move to ensure the secret remained buried. Parker leaned forward, voice low but resolute. And, Sir Reginald's death? A tragic culmination. Whimsy replied, not murder in the traditional sense, but the unintended consequence of a confrontation gone awry. The nephew's recklessness led to a fatal accident, swiftly concealed beneath a facade of composure and half-truths. Turning back to Grayson, Whimsy added, your role was that of the cautious custodian, working behind the scenes to mitigate damage, but unaware of the nephew's more extreme methods. The young man, pale and trembling, finally broke his silence, his voice bitter and defeated. I did what I thought necessary, but it all spun beyond control. Whimsy's expression softened, tinged with his characteristic dry irony. The tragic folly of misguided passion, a tale as old as time, yet always freshly mournful. With the mystery unraveled, the household exhaled a collective sigh. The child, now safe under the protection of Lord Quentin's willing guardianship, symbolized not just a secret kept, but a chance for redemption. As the guests dispersed, Whimsy took a moment beside the staircase's shadowed recess, contemplating the interplay of light and darkness that had so nearly swallowed the truth. Turned to Parker, a faint smile playing at his lips. Justice, my dear Inspector, is less a matter of dramatic gestures than the patient accumulation of small facts, each seemingly trivial, but together forming a chain unbreakable. Lighting a slender cigar, Whimsy added with characteristic wit, and, as Shakespeare might say, the devil can cite scripture for his purpose, though fortunately for us he cannot quite outwit Lord Peter Whimsy. With that, he departed into the crisp night, leaving Asquith Hall cloaked once more, in silence. But this time a silence cleared of shadows where truth, like the dawn, had finally broken through.